My name is Sarah, and for as long as I can remember, our family was the picture of American success. My father, Richard Sterling, was a self-made man, a titan in real estate, and a pillar of our community. He built an empire, but more importantly, he built a family that, from the outside, seemed unbreakable. My mother, Eleanor, the elegant matriarch, my older brother, David, the charming golden boy destined to take over the business, and me, the quiet observer, always watching, always feeling like there was something just beneath the surface. We lived in a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons, summers in Martha's Vineyard, Christmases in Aspen. A life of privilege, yes, but also, I genuinely believed, a life of love. Then, everything changed. Father died suddenly. A massive heart attack. It was a shock, of course. But what truly shattered our world wasn't his passing, but what he left behind. His last will and testament. It was read to us in the oak-paneled study, the same room where we'd celebrated countless birthdays and holidays. And that's when the first crack appeared in our perfect facade. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, I bequeath," he continued with the usual pleasantries, the house, the personal effects, a generous trust. Then he got to David, a substantial share of the business, as expected. My portion was also substantial, enough to live comfortably, but not the controlling interest that David received. We all breathed a collective sigh of relief, until he uttered a name none of us recognized. "And to my son, Michael Sterling, I bequeath 25% of Sterling Holdings and the property located at 123 Maple Drive, Springfield, Illinois." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Michael Sterling? My mother gasped, a delicate hand flying to her mouth. David's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed into slits. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. Who was Michael Sterling? Father had never mentioned another child. Never. This was a nightmare. Days turned into a blur of hushed conversations, angry outbursts from David, and my mother's almost catatonic state. David, always the protector of the family name, immediately hired private investigators. He was convinced it was a con, a scheme to defraud us. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Father was meticulous. He wouldn't make a mistake like this. Despite David's warnings, I couldn't just sit there. I had to know. I found Michael. He wasn't some con artist. He was ordinary. A quiet man working as a carpenter in a small town in Illinois. He looked nothing like us, yet there was a subtle resemblance to my father around the eyes. When I introduced myself, he looked shell-shocked. He knew about my father, of course, but only as the powerful businessman who had supported him financially for years, discreetly. He had no idea he was a Sterling, or that he was in the will. His mother, a woman named Clara, had always told him his father was a kind, wealthy man who preferred to remain anonymous. I brought him back to the Hamptons. The confrontation was explosive. My mother, seeing Michael, collapsed. David roared, accusing him of blackmail. But Michael, surprisingly calm, pulled out a faded letter. It was from my father, dated 35 years ago, acknowledging Michael as his son, expressing regret for his absence and promising to always provide for him. He also had copies of bank transfers spanning decades. It was undeniable. My father had a secret life. My mother, finally, through tears, confessed. Clara was her best friend in college. They had lost touch after graduation, but years later, Clara had sought out my father, desperate. She was pregnant, alone, and the child's father had abandoned her. My father, out of compassion, had helped her financially. But somewhere along the line, compassion turned into something more, a brief affair. My mother had known, had forgiven him, had even agreed to keep the secret to protect the family's reputation. But she had no idea Michael was actually his son. She thought it was just financial aid. As if the revelation of Michael wasn't enough, another, more disturbing truth began to surface. My father's finances were not as pristine as we thought. David, now consumed by the need to prove Michael a fraud, had launched a full audit of Sterling Holdings. He discovered a massive discrepancy. Over $50 million was missing, not just unaccounted for, but vanished. This was far beyond what Michael had ever received. The family was in disarray. My mother, overwhelmed, retreated into herself. David became obsessed, convinced Michael was part of a larger conspiracy. But I had a different feeling. Father was too shrewd, too careful to let $50 million simply vanish. This smelled like something far more sinister, something that went beyond a mere family secret. It felt like a crime. We started digging deeper, poring over old financial statements, meeting with my father's most trusted, albeit tight-lipped, associates. The harder we looked, the more questions arose. Why were certain transactions shrouded in secrecy? Why were there so many shell corporations? And why, in God's name, was there a recurring payment to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, labeled only as Project Nightingale? Project Nightingale. The name haunted me. It sounded so poetic, yet it was tied to something so dark. We finally managed to get a subpoena for the Cayman Islands bank records. What we found was chilling. Project Nightingale wasn't a business venture. It was a payoff, a series of large, untraceable payments made to a single account, year after year. The account holder? A shell company, but the transfers originated from my father's personal accounts, not Sterling Holdings. This was something he was hiding from his own company, from his own family. Then, Michael, with his carpenter's eye for detail, noticed something odd in my father's old desk. A false bottom. Inside, a small, locked metal box. We broke it open. Inside were old newspaper clippings, faded and yellowed, from nearly 30 years ago. They detailed a tragic accident, a construction site collapse, 6 workers dead, a local union leader heavily implicated in cutting corners. The company responsible? A small, struggling construction firm that my father had acquired shortly after the incident. And among the clippings, a single photograph. It was a group photo of the construction crew, and there, standing in the middle, looking young and hopeful, was Michael's mother, Clara. And next to her, smiling broadly, was the union leader implicated in the collapse, a man named Frank Sullivan. My father had bought the company, but not just that. He had also bought Frank Sullivan's silence, burying the truth of what really happened at that construction site. He didn't just pay off Frank, he was paying off a secret that involved Clara. My father hadn't just helped Clara with money, he had orchestrated a massive cover-up. Clara hadn't just had an affair with my father, she had been at the construction site the day it collapsed. She wasn't directly responsible, but she knew the truth about Frank Sullivan's negligence. And my father, in his desperate attempt to protect her, and perhaps his own nascent real estate interests, he was a rising developer at the time, and any scandal could have ruined him, had bought her silence too. He'd bought everyone's silence. But there was more. The Project Nightingale payments weren't just for Frank Sullivan. Some were going to Clara herself, not just for child support, but as a perpetual payoff to keep her quiet about the deeper truth of that day. My father hadn't just covered up a crime. He'd essentially built his empire on its foundation. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man I idolized, was a criminal. He had built his fortune on lies and the deaths of innocent people. And my mother had known a version of this, but had chosen to protect the family's reputation over justice. The Sterling legacy, once a source of pride, was now a monument to deceit. David, my proud, stubborn brother, was initially furious, dismissing everything as an elaborate frame-up. He still couldn't believe our father was capable of such a thing. But as Michael and I presented the evidence, piece by agonizing piece, the bank records, the old clippings, Clara's own hushed admissions over the phone, she was old and frail now, riddled with guilt. His denial slowly crumbled. The golden boy began to see the tarnished truth. He paced, he raged, he drank. He was torn between protecting the Sterling name, which he had always been groomed to do, and the crushing weight of this horrifying truth. This wasn't just a family dispute. It was a criminal conspiracy. The choice was stark: protect the legacy of a criminal father, or seek justice for the victims and dismantle everything he believed in. It was Michael, surprisingly, who helped him see the light. Michael, who had every right to be angry and resentful, simply said, "He was your father, David. He was my father. He made mistakes, big ones. But bearing the truth won't make them go away. It just keeps people hurt." It was a moment of profound clarity. David, for the first time, truly saw Michael as his brother, not an intruder. The decision was agonizing, but it was made. We would expose the truth. This meant not only tarnishing our father's name, but potentially risking our own financial ruin, as the company could be implicated. My mother, though heartbroken, finally agreed. She said, "Richard made his choices. We must make ours." We assembled our evidence, armed with a new resolve. We approached the authorities, not just with the story of a secret child, but with a meticulously documented case of fraud, bribery, and cover-up. The sheer scale of it shocked even the seasoned investigators. The media, of course, got wind of it. The Sterling name, once synonymous with prestige, became synonymous with scandal. David, surprisingly, became our strongest advocate. He stepped down from Sterling Holdings, ensuring he couldn't be accused of protecting the company's past crimes. He worked tirelessly with me and Michael, tracing every lead, providing insider knowledge that only he possessed. We testified. We faced the public scrutiny, the whispers, the accusations. It was brutal. But for the first time, we were truly a family, united not by blood alone, but by a shared purpose, to finally bring justice to those who had been wronged. The legal battles were long, painful, and public. Sterling Holdings faced immense scrutiny, but David and I ensured that every last penny of the illicit gains was recovered and channeled into a foundation established for the victims' families. The victims, or what was left of their families, finally received some measure of justice, some closure. Frank Sullivan, long living a quiet life, was finally brought to account for his role in the construction tragedy. My mother found a quiet peace, dedicating her time to charity, finding purpose beyond the shattered facade of her marriage. David, free from the corporate world, rediscovered himself, pursuing passions he'd long suppressed. And Michael? He built a life, not just for himself, but for his community, using his portion of the inheritance to establish a vocational school for young people, a legacy of true building, not destruction. As for me, I learned that family isn't about blood alone, or shared secrets, or even wealth. It's about truth, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild, brick by painful brick. The Sterling name would forever carry the weight of its past, but now it also carried the hope of a future built on honesty. Our story wasn't a fairy tale, but a real American drama, messy and painful, but ultimately a story of redemption. And that, in itself, was a legacy worth fighting for.